What happens when a woman discovers her billionaire husband is cheating? What if she's 6 months pregnant with their first child, the long-awaited heir to a colossal fortune? Most would confront him, cry or call a lawyer. But Isabella Sterling is not most women. When she found her husband Alexander dining with his mistress at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she didn't scream. She didn't throw a drink. She smiled, walked to their table, and pulled up a chair. What followed wasn't just a confrontation. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare that would shatter a dynasty and leave a powerful man utterly humiliated in front of the world. This is the story of how a woman's quiet grace became her most devastating weapon. The life of Isabella and Alexander Sterling was a meticulously curated masterpiece. To the outside world, they were the pinnacle of New York society. Alexander Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO of Sterling Global, a multi-generational real estate and tech empire, was devastatingly handsome, sharp, and commanded any room he entered. His name was synonymous with power, his face a regular feature in Forbes and Time. Isabella, at 32, was his perfect counterpart. She wasn't just beautiful. She possessed a serene elegance and an intellect that often went underestimated. An art historian with a degree from the Sorbonne, she ran the Sterling Foundation, the charitable arm of the family empire, with quiet efficiency and genuine passion. Their marriage, 5 years in the making, was considered a merger of equals New World ambition, meeting Old World grace. Their home was a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, a testament to minimalist luxury, with panoramic views of Central Park. Its walls were adorned with a collection of art that Isabella had personally curated, a mix of impressionist masters and daring contemporary artists. It was a home built for magazine spreads and hosting powerful people, a stage for their perfect life. And now the final piece of that perfect life was falling into place. Isabella was 6 months pregnant with a son, the future heir to the Sterling dynasty. Alexander's father, the formidable patriarch Charles Sterling, was ecstatic. The board of directors was placated. The legacy was secured. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was beginning to flake. The change in Alexander had been subtle at first, a slow erosion of intimacy. He started working later, his excuses plausible but increasingly frequent. Board meetings running over, a late-night call with the Tokyo office, putting out a fire with the new acquisition. He would come home smelling of a faint, unfamiliar perfume, something floral and exotic, starkly different from Isabella's subtle scent of sandalwood and vanilla. He'd blame it on a client or a colleague. His phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or placed face down. He would take calls in his study, with the door firmly closed, his voice a low, urgent murmur. When she entered, he would end the call abruptly. "Just Julian, coordinating the gala," he'd say, naming his ever-loyal chief of staff. But his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. Isabella was no fool. She had been raised in a world where marriages were often strategic alliances and infidelity was a quiet, dirty secret. But she believed they were different. Theirs had started with a genuine spark, a meeting of minds at a gallery opening where they debated the merits of Rothko for an hour. He had pursued her relentlessly, charmed by her wit and her refusal to be impressed by his name alone. He had promised her a partnership, a life of shared passions, not just shared assets. The pregnancy should have been their moment of ultimate union. In the first few months, Alexander was attentive, almost reverently so. He would rest his hand on her still flat stomach, a look of awe on his face. "Our son Izzy," he'd whisper. "He's going to change the world." But as her belly grew, so did the distance between them. The loving gestures became mechanical. The compliments felt rehearsed. The chill started to set in. The first concrete clue came in the form of a credit card statement. Isabella handled their personal finances, a task Alexander found tedious. Tucked between charges for the foundation's annual gala and a custom-built crib was a charge for $75,000 from a boutique jeweler she'd never heard of Seraphine's atelier. It wasn't her birthday. It wasn't their anniversary. When she casually asked him about it, he froze for a fraction of a second before composing himself. "Ah, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a gift for my mother. Her birthday is next month. I wanted to get something special." It was a perfect lie. Plausible, thoughtful even. Except for one small detail, Isabella had already purchased a birthday gift for her mother-in-law, a rare first-edition book they had discussed with Alexander weeks ago. He had forgotten. The lie, so smooth and yet so clumsy, was like a shard of glass in her heart. She didn't confront him. Her mind, trained to analyze the subtleties of art and history, began to see the patterns. The late nights, the secret calls, the phantom perfume, the extravagant, unexplained gift. They were brushstrokes in a portrait of deceit. Crying or screaming would achieve nothing. It would only give him the chance to lie more, to gaslight her, to call her hormonal and emotional due to the pregnancy. No. If Alexander was playing a game, she would learn the rules and play it better. She would not be a hysterical pregnant wife. She would be a sterling. And sterlings did not lose. Her first move was to call her old college friend, a woman named Chloe, who now ran one of London's most discreet private investigation firms. "Chloe," Isabella said, her voice even and calm as she sat in her sunlit home office overlooking the city. "I need your help with a delicate matter. It requires the utmost discretion. For you, Izzy. Anything." Chloe's voice came back, warm but professional. "What's going on?" "I need to know about a jeweler called Seraphine's Atelier in the city, and I need to know who my husband is meeting." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chloe knew Isabella well enough to understand the gravity of the request. "I'll put my best person on it, a specialist in marital portfolio analysis. You'll have your answers soon." While she waited, Isabella played her part to perfection. She was the glowing, expectant mother. She attended charity luncheons, discussed nursery color palettes with her mother-in-law, and smiled lovingly at her husband during public appearances. She even brought up the Sterling Foundation Gala, their biggest event of the year, which was just a few weeks away. "Alexander, darling," she said one evening as he loosened his tie. "I was thinking about the seating chart for the gala. Should we put Marcus Thorne at our table? I know his company is a major competitor, but it might be a good political move." Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "Thorne, no. Absolutely not. Keep him as far away from me as possible. He's a snake." The venom in his voice was startling. Isabella filed that piece of information away. Marcus Thorne. A rival. A week later, a coded email arrived from Chloe. It contained a secure link to a folder. Isabella locked her office door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She clicked the link. The folder was filled with photographs and a detailed report. The pictures were grainy, long-lens shots, but the subjects were unmistakable. Alexander laughing and animated in a way she hadn't seen in months. And with him, a woman. She was stunning in a fierce, overt way that contrasted with Isabella's quiet beauty. Long, dark hair, sharp features, a wardrobe that screamed expensive and daring. The report identified her as Serafina Dubois, the 30-year-old owner of a trendy avant-garde art gallery in Chelsea. And as Chloe had discovered with a bit of digging, the owner of a small exclusive jewelry design studio, Seraphine's Atelier. The photos chronicled their meetings, lunches at discreet but chic bistros, late-evening drinks at shadowy hotel bars, a weekend trip to a boutique hotel in the Hamptons, a trip Alexander had claimed was a corporate retreat. The most damning photo showed Alexander fastening a necklace around Serafina's neck. It was a breathtaking piece, a cascade of black diamonds and a single enormous ruby, the $75,000 necklace. But it was the report that turned Isabella's blood to ice. Serafina Dubois wasn't just a gallery owner. Before opening her gallery, she had a brief but notable career in corporate strategy, working for a firm that specialized in hostile takeovers. And according to Chloe's source, she had recently been in quiet contact with several executives from Thorn Industries, the company run by Marcus Thorn, Alexander's biggest rival. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a sordid affair. It was something far more dangerous. Serafina wasn't just a mistress. She was a corporate predator. She wasn't after Alexander's heart. She was after his Ebora. And he, blinded by lust and arrogance, was leading her right through the front gates. The pain was immense, a physical blow that left her breathless. It wasn't just the betrayal of their marriage vows, but the utter disregard for their family, their future, their unborn child. He was risking everything they had built for a woman who was actively plotting his downfall. Isabella stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She placed a protective hand on her swollen belly. The tears she had refused to shed now came not in a storm of hysteria, but as silent hot tracks down her face. She was mourning the man she thought she married, the life she thought they had. But as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the grief began to crystallize into something harder, colder. Resolve. She would not let this woman destroy her family's legacy. She would not let Alexander's folly ruin her son's birthright. He had made his move. Serafina had made hers. Now it was her turn to play. Her plan began to form not in a burst of anger, but as a slow, calculated strategy. A public divorce would be messy, ugly, and might give Serafina the chaos she needed to help Marcus Thorn make his move. A private confrontation would be met with lies and denial. No, the humiliation had to be as public as their life yet, as intimate as his betrayal. It had to be a statement, a move so audacious that it would leave him powerless. The PI's report mentioned their favorite meeting spot, L'Etoile, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a public number. It was where the city's true power brokers went to make deals and conduct their affairs in what they believed was absolute privacy. Alexander and Serafina dined there every Tuesday. Next Tuesday was in 5 days. Isabella wiped her tears, her expression hardening into a mask of pure determination. She picked up her phone, but she didn't call a lawyer. She called the head stylist at Bergdorf Goodman. "Celeste," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I need a dress, something for a quiet dinner, something memorable." The stage was set. The players were in position. The quiet, graceful wife was about to direct the final act. The 5 days leading up to Tuesday were a masterclass in deception. Isabella moved through her life with a newfound purpose, her grief and anger hidden beneath a veneer of serene domesticity. She was no longer just a wife. She was a general preparing for battle. She met with Celeste at Bergdorf's in a private salon. She didn't want something flashy or revealing. She needed armor. She chose a dress of deep emerald green silk, a custom design by Carolina Herrera. It was deceptively simple, with long sleeves and a high neckline, but it was tailored to perfection, draping over her 6-month pregnant belly, in a way that was both elegant and profoundly maternal. The color was chosen deliberately, the color of envy, but also of rebirth and power. It would stand out against the restaurant's crimson and gold decor. Her next call was to Julian Vance Alexander's chief of staff. Julian was in his early 40s, perpetually dressed in impeccable suits, his loyalty to the Sterling family absolute. He had served Alexander's father before him and viewed the Sterling legacy with near religious reverence. He was smart, discreet, and Isabella suspected not entirely blind to his boss's recent indiscretions. "Julian," she said, catching him between meetings, "I need a small favor, and it needs to stay entirely between us." "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Anything." "I need to see the final draft of the prenuptial agreement Alexander and I signed." There was a slight hesitation. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she replied, her voice placid. "I'm working on our estate planning for the baby, and my lawyer needs to cross-reference a clause. It's just tedious paperwork." The lie was smooth, corporate, and believable. Julian, ever the efficient soldier, sent a secure digital copy to her private email within the hour. That evening, Isabella didn't read it. She already knew what it contained. Her own father, a shrewd old-money patriarch himself, had insisted on a particularly robust infidelity clause, one that Alexander, in his love-struck arrogance 5 years ago, had barely glanced at before signing. The clause was an ironclad fortress. In the event of proven adultery, especially while expecting a child who was the designated heir control of Isabella's shares in Sterling Global, a significant non-voting block gifted to her upon marriage would immediately become voting shares. Furthermore, she would gain 2 seats on the Sterling Foundation's board and unilateral control over a substantial trust fund established for their future children. It was a nuclear option her father had put in place, hoping she would never need it. Instead of reading the prenup, she spent the evening researching. She delved into every article, every financial report, every snippet of gossip she could find on Marcus Thorne and Serafina Dubois. She discovered that Thorne Industries had been attempting a stealth acquisition of a smaller tech company that Sterling Global was also in the final stages of acquiring. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was an active corporate war. The intel Serafina could be feeding him would be devastating. She could be leaking bid numbers, negotiation strategies, internal weaknesses. Alexander wasn't just having an affair. He was committing corporate treason. Her anger was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The sheer scale of his stupidity was breathtaking. On Saturday, she attended a charity luncheon for the New York Public Library. Several of the city's most powerful wives were there, women who traded information like currency. Isabella listened more than she spoke, steering the conversation with subtle questions. "I saw the most fascinating gallery in Chelsea the other day." She mentioned to a group that included the wife of a major banker. Dubois Gallery. The owner, Serafina, seems to have burst onto the scene. So ambitious. One of the women, a notorious gossip named Beatrice, took the bait immediately. "Ambitious is one word for it," she sniffed. "Climber is another. She's been seen everywhere with everyone. Last year, it was some European duke. Now she seems to have her sights set on the corporate world. I heard she's very close with Marcus Thorne." "Really?" Isabella asked, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Oh, yes." Beatrice continued, delighted to be the center of attention. My husband says Thorne is using her as a social consultant. We all know what that means. The pieces were not just connecting, they were forming a mosaic of conspiracy. Serafina was Thorne's weapon, aimed directly at the heart of Sterling Global. On Monday, the day before the dinner, Isabella made her final preparations. She scheduled a hair and makeup appointment for the following afternoon. She laid out the emerald dress along with a pair of low-heeled Manolo Blahniks and the simple strand of pearls her own grandmother had given her. It was a classic, unimpeachable look. Her final and most critical move was to set up a meeting for Wednesday morning, the day after the dinner. She sent a single encrypted email from a private account. It was not addressed to her lawyer. It was addressed to Charles Sterling, her father-in-law. The subject line was simple: urgent family matter regarding the future of the company. She requested a meeting at his private office alone. Charles, a man who wasted no time on trivialities, confirmed within minutes. 9 a.m. With that, her chessboard was set. Every piece was in position. She had the evidence from the PI. She had confirmation of Serafina's link to Thorne. She had her legal standing via the prenup. And she had an audience with the one man who could bring Alexander to his knees without destroying the company his father. The dinner at L'Etoile would not be the start of the war. It would be the checkmate. That night, Alexander came home late again. He looked tired, but energized, a strange combination she now understood. He had likely just left Serafina. He brought her a small bouquet of white roses. "For you, Izzy," he said, kissing her cheek. The scent of that other woman's perfume clung to his suit jacket. "Just thinking of you and our boy." Isabella accepted the flowers with a gentle smile. She held his gaze, her heart, a block of ice. "Thank you, darling. They're beautiful." Inside, she was screaming. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost surreal. He stood there, offering a token of his supposed affection, while actively dismantling their life and risking their son's future. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, a flicker of something guilt concern in his eyes. "You seem quiet." "Just a little tired," she said, placing a hand on her belly. "The baby has been kicking all day. He's a strong one." She let her words hang in the air, a subtle reminder of what he was betraying. He nodded, the flicker of guilt extinguished, replaced by a familiar dismissive confidence. "He's a Sterling. Of course he's strong." Isabella went to bed early, claiming fatigue. But she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring into the darkness, her mind calm and clear. She felt no fear, only a profound and chilling sense of clarity. She was not the victim in this story. She was the arbiter. She was the one who would decide how it ended. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, the hopeful art historian swept off her feet by a charismatic billionaire. She had believed in fairy tales. Now she knew better. Life wasn't a fairy tale. It was a game of power. And she was about to show everyone, most of all her husband, that she knew how to win. Tuesday evening arrived with the cool, crisp air of a New York autumn. L'Etoile was located on a discreet side street in the East 60s, its entrance marked only by a single polished brass star on a mahogany door. There was no sign. You either knew about it or you didn't. It was a sanctuary for the city's elite, a place where privacy was the most expensive item on the menu. At 8:00 p.m., Alexander Sterling and Serafina Dubois were seated at the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth upholstered in deep crimson velvet. It offered a commanding view of the dining room, while remaining shrouded in intimate shadow. To any observer, they looked like the ultimate power couple. Alexander, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, leaned in his focus entirely on her. Serafina was a vision in black, a sleek, form-fitting dress that was both elegant and overtly sensual. Around her neck glittered the necklace of black diamonds, and ruby, a stark and stunning statement against her skin. They were laughing, sharing a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Alexander felt a thrill he hadn't felt in years. With Serafina, he wasn't just a husband or a CEO bound by legacy. He felt like a conqueror. She challenged him, excited him, and her ambition mirrored his own. He was utterly captivated, completely unaware that he was a fly, caught in a very sophisticated web. "The final bid for the Omnicore acquisition is going in tomorrow morning," he murmured, his voice low. "Thorne has no idea what our final number is. We're going to crush him." Serafina smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. She took a sip of her wine. "I have no doubt, darling. You always get what you want." She subtly checked her watch. She had a call scheduled with Marcus Thorne at 10 p.m. to give him that exact number. At 8:15 p.m., the mahogany door of L'Etoile opened. A hush seemed to fall over the front of the restaurant as Isabella Sterling entered. She was the personification of grace. The emerald green dress flowed around her, a splash of vibrant life in the dimly lit room. Her pearls glowed softly at her throat. Her hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was subtle, emphasizing her luminous eyes. She wasn't just pregnant. She was regal, a Madonna carrying the heir to a dynasty. The maitre d', a man named Jean-Pierre, who had managed the restaurant for 20 years and prided himself on his unflappable discretion, felt a jolt of pure panic. He rushed forward. "Mrs. Sterling!" What a wonderful surprise. We were not expecting you." Isabella gave him a warm, serene smile that did not reach her eyes. "Jean-Pierre, lovely to see you. I was just in the neighborhood and felt a sudden craving for your famous truffle risotto. I'm sure you can find a small table for me." Her tone was light, but her eyes scanned the room. Landing directly on the corner booth where her husband sat his back partially to her, Jean-Pierre began to sweat. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling, but perhaps a table by the window. It is quieter." He was trying to steer her away to avert a catastrophe. "No need to trouble yourself," Isabella said, her voice still gentle. "I see my husband is already here. What a lovely coincidence. I'll just join him." Before Jean-Pierre could protest, she began to walk. The journey across the dining room felt like 100 miles. Every eye was on her. The low hum of conversation faltered. People who recognized her, and in this room everyone did, froze with forks halfway to their mouths. They smelled blood in the water. This was better than theater. Alexander heard the shift in the room's atmosphere. He looked up from Serafina's face, annoyed by the distraction. His eyes followed the collective gaze. And then he saw her. For a moment, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a ghost. Isabella. Here. In their place. In her emerald dress, her pregnancy a statement of fact, walking directly toward them. A cold dread, heavy and absolute, washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was a nightmare. Serafina, seeing his expression, turned. Her eyes widened, her mask of sultry confidence cracking for a split second. She recovered quickly, her back stiffening, but the surprise was evident. Isabella reached the table. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hysterical. She smiled a bright, social smile that was more terrifying than any scream. "Alexander, darling," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "Fancy seeing you here. I didn't know you had a business dinner tonight." Alexander was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from his pregnant wife to his mistress, trapped in the crimson booth, a spotlight of social horror shining directly on him. Isabella's gaze shifted to Serafina. She looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance that took in the dress, the ambition in her eyes, and finally the necklace. "And you must be Serafina," Isabella said, her tone polite, as if meeting a new employee. "Alexander has told me so little about you." The subtle emphasis on little was a scalpel-sharp cut. She extended a hand. "Isabella Sterling, it's a pleasure to finally put a face to the name." Serafina, forced into the role of a business associate, had no choice but to take the offered hand. Isabella's grip was firm, her skin cool. "A pleasure to meet you," Serafina managed to say, her voice tight. "Don't get up," Isabella said, gesturing to the booth. She turned to the horrified Jean-Pierre, who was hovering nearby. "Could we get another chair, please? I'd love to join." It was not a request. It was a command. A trembling busboy scrambled to bring a chair, placing it at the head of the table directly between Alexander and Serafina. Isabella sat down gracefully, placing her clutch on the table. She smoothed her dress over her belly, an unconscious protective gesture that was also a powerful visual statement to the entire room. She was the wife, the mother of his child, the matriarch in waiting, and she was taking her seat at the table. The silence was deafening. Alexander finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Isabella, what are you doing here? I told you, darling, I was craving risotto," she said cheerfully. She turned to the waiter who had appeared ghost-like beside her. "I'll have the risotto and a sparkling water with a slice of lemon, please." She then looked back at her husband. "You know the baby gets the most peculiar cravings." She was orchestrating the entire scene with the skill of a seasoned conductor. She wasn't acknowledging the affair. She was simply and brutally ignoring it, steamrolling them with social grace. She had effectively demoted Serafina from a romantic rival to an awkward third wheel at a marital dinner. Isabella then turned her full attention back to Serafina. "That's a magnificent necklace," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Black diamonds are so wonderfully dramatic. Alexander has such specific taste." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In fact, it looks remarkably similar to a design I saw in a family lookbook. A sterling heirloom, I believe it was called the Nightfall Ruby, commissioned by Alexander's great-grandfather. Of course, this must be a modern interpretation. The original would be far too valuable for everyday wear." Serafina's hand instinctively went to the necklace. The implication was clear and devastating. Isabella was suggesting that the unique, expensive gift she wore was either a cheap copy of a family jewel, or worse, an actual heirloom that Alexander had stolen for his mistress. She had turned the symbol of their affair into a mark of shame. Alexander felt a wave of nausea. The necklace wasn't a family heirloom, but he had told Serafina it was spinning a tale to make the gift seem more significant, to bind her to him with history and legacy. Isabella somehow knew, or she was making an impossibly brilliant, cruel guess. Either way, he was exposed as both a cheat and a liar in a single, elegant sentence. He looked at Serafina. Her face was pale, her eyes burning with a mixture of fury and humiliation. She understood what was happening. She was being publicly dismissed, reduced to a tacky cliché. Isabella continued, her voice light and conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "So Serafina Alexander mentioned you're in the art world. So fascinating. We must have you consult on the new wing of the children's hospital the Foundation is building. We want it to be inspiring for the patients." She was offering Serafina a charity project. It was a perfectly pitched insult, framing her as someone who could be hired a vendor, while simultaneously reinforcing her own position as the philanthropic leader of the Sterling family. The humiliation was complete. Alexander Sterling, the titan of industry, sat trapped and emasculated. He could not yell at his pregnant wife in a room full of his peers. He could not comfort his mistress. He could do nothing but sit there and absorb the crushing weight of his own public disgrace. The other diners were no longer even pretending not to watch, their faces a mixture of shock and glee. Isabella's risotto arrived. She took a small, deliberate bite. "Delicious," she pronounced. She looked at her husband, her eyes for the first time losing their social sparkle and revealing a glimpse of the Arctic cold beneath. "You look pale, darling. Are you feeling all right?" Alexander didn't answer. He just stared at her, seeing his wife for the first time, not as a graceful accessory, but as a formidable, terrifying opponent who had just destroyed him without raising her voice. The meal, or what was left of it, ended in torturous silence. Isabella ate her risotto with a placid, unhurried enjoyment that was profoundly unnerving. Alexander and Serafina sat like stone figures, the expensive wine and half-eaten food growing cold on their plates. The air was thick with unspoken fury. Finally, Isabella placed her fork and knife down neatly. She dabbed her lips with her napkin, the picture of decorum. "Well, that was lovely," she said into the silence. She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Darling, I'll take a taxi. You two finish up your meeting." She gave Alexander a cool marital peck on the cheek, a final public assertion of her role. Then, with a slight dismissive nod to the seething Serafina, she turned and walked away. Her exit was as graceful and devastating as her entrance. The entire dining room watched her go, a collective sigh of released tension rippling through the space. Isabella Sterling had not caused a scene. She had become the scene. The moment the mahogany door closed behind her, Serafina's composure shattered. "What the hell was that, Alex?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She knew. She knew everything. She made me look like a fool, like some pathetic little tramp. Alexander finally snapped out of his stupor, his humiliation quickly curdling into rage. "Keep your voice down," he gritted out, throwing his napkin onto the table. "You think I wanted this? This was a calculated attack, a setup." She called my necklace a copy. Serafina's eyes blazed. "She offered me a charity job. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Yes, I have some idea," he shot back, his voice rising. He was the one whose entire world had just been detonated in public. He threw several $100 bills onto the table, not even looking at the check. "Let's go. Now." The car ride to Serafina's apartment was a vortex of toxic anger. They tore into each other, the illusion of their perfect, powerful romance, disintegrating into ugly accusations. "How could you be so careless? How could she have known we'd be there?" Serafina demanded. "Don't you dare put this on me. This is your fault as much as mine. You and your ambition, pushing and pushing." "My ambition?" She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You loved my ambition 5 minutes ago." "Don't you try to paint me as the villain here, Alexander. You're the one who is married. You're the one who lied to me about that ridiculous necklace." He dropped her off at her building with a screech of tires, the argument unresolved, the air thick with the stench of betrayal and failure. As he sped away, his rage toward Serafina was already being eclipsed by a tidal wave of fury directed at Isabella. The quiet, supportive, predictable woman he thought he knew had just revealed a side to her that was utterly foreign and terrifying. She hadn't just confronted him, she had strategically disemboweled him. He stormed into their Park Avenue penthouse, ready for the screaming match of a lifetime. He found Isabella in the living room, calmly sipping a cup of chamomile tea. She was no longer wearing the emerald dress, having changed into a simple cream-colored cashmere robe. She looked up as he entered, her expression placid. "You're home early," she said quietly. The dam of his anger broke. What the hell was that, Isabella? What was that disgusting theatrical display? Do you have any idea what you've done? "Yes," she replied, her voice losing its softness and taking on a steely edge. "I believe I do. I revealed the truth in a manner you couldn't lie your way out of, though I'm sure you will try. You humiliated me. You made a spectacle of our private life in front of everyone." Isabella set her teacup down with a soft click. She finally stood up, facing him. For the first time, he saw the depth of the cold fury in her eyes. The gentle, forgiving woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place was a stranger. "You," she said, her voice dangerously low, "humiliated me the moment you chose to break your vows. You humiliated me with every lie, every late night, every secret call. You humiliated our marriage, our family, and our unborn son. My spectacle, as you call it, was merely holding a mirror up to your disgrace. Do not for 1 second confuse my actions with your own." "This is about that woman, isn't it? It's jealousy." Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of all humor. "Jealousy? Oh, Alexander, you are so breathtakingly arrogant. You think this is about her? She is a symptom, a vulgar, ambitious symptom of your own weakness. She means nothing to me." She walked over to her desk and picked up a slim folder. It was the report from Chloe's investigation. She tossed it onto the marble coffee table between them. "This is what this is about." He opened it. His blood ran cold. Photos, timestamps, hotel receipts. A detailed report on Serafina Dubois, including her past in corporate espionage and her recent frequent contact with Marcus Thorne. "She's playing you, you fool." Isabella's voice cut through his shock. "She's been feeding information to Thorne for months. I imagine she was planning to call him tonight with your secret bid number for Omnicore, wasn't she?" Alexander stared at the papers, his world tilting on its axis. The affair was one thing. This was a betrayal of a different magnitude. It was a dagger aimed at the heart of his company, his legacy. And he had handed it to her himself. He felt like an idiot, a colossal, pathetic fool. I didn't know," he stammered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a sickening dread. "No," Isabella agreed, her voice relentless. "You didn't, because you weren't thinking with your head. You were so wrapped up in your sordid little fantasy that you failed to see the viper in your bed. You put this entire company, your father's life's work, your son's inheritance, at risk. For what? For her." He sank onto the sofa, the full weight of his catastrophic misjudgment crashing down on him. He had been played, manipulated, and utterly compromised. He looked up at Isabella, a desperate plea forming in his eyes. He expected to see triumph, but he saw only icy resolve. This wasn't the end of her attack. It was just the beginning. "This changes things, Izzy," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thorne, we have to stop him. We have to work together." Isabella gave him a pitying look. "There is no we, Alexander. Not anymore. You seem to be under the impression that you are still in a position to negotiate." She retrieved another document from her desk. She held it out to him. It was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the infidelity clause highlighted in yellow. "As of my discovery of your affair, which is now meticulously documented and can be corroborated by at least half of New York's elite society, thanks to your dinner tonight, this clause is in effect. My shares in Sterling Global are now voting shares. I have unilateral control over our son's trust, and I have the right to appoint 2 new members to the Foundation's board." Alexander stared at the paper, his mind reeling. He remembered signing it, laughing it off as a formality for her father. He had never imagined it would be used. It was a corporate coup hidden within their marriage vows. "You can't," he whispered. "That would destabilize everything." "On the contrary," Isabella said, her voice like ice, "it will stabilize it. Because unlike you, I will not put this family's legacy at risk for a cheap thrill. I will protect it. You have proven you are unfit to be the sole guardian of it." The full, terrifying scope of her plan was finally dawning on him. The dinner wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about creating incontrovertible public evidence to trigger the prenup. It was a brilliant, ruthless, and perfectly executed maneuver. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., she continued, "I'm meeting with your father. I will be presenting him with 2 things. The first is this folder detailing your gross negligence and the existential threat you have exposed the company to. The second will be my proposal for the way forward." "What proposal?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "My proposal," Isabella stated, her gaze unwavering, "is that you will take a voluntary, indefinite leave of absence as CEO of Sterling Global. You will check into a wellness retreat in Switzerland to reevaluate your priorities. The board, influenced by my new voting power and your father's fury, will agree. An interim CEO will be appointed. Julian, perhaps. He is loyal to the family, not just to you." It was a complete and total annihilation. She wasn't just divorcing him or taking his money. She was stripping him of his identity, his power, his throne. She was exiling him. He looked at the woman standing before him. The warm, loving wife was gone, replaced by a queen executing a flawless palace coup. He had mistaken her grace for weakness. He had mistaken her silence for submission. He had underestimated her at every turn, and now he was paying the ultimate price. He wasn't just humiliated. He was shattered. The 9 a.m. meeting in Charles Sterling's office was less of a conversation and more of a sentencing. The office itself was a shrine to corporate power. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a view of the city from the 80th floor that made the world look small and conquerable. Charles, a man in his late 60s with his son's sharp features etched into a sterner, more unforgiving mask, sat behind his enormous desk. He had already read the folder Isabella had sent over via a secure courier an hour earlier. His face was granite. Isabella, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue suit, sat opposite him. She did not present her case with emotion or hysterics. She laid out the facts with the cool, detached precision of a corporate lawyer. She detailed Alexander's affair, Serafina's connection to Marcus Thorne, and the imminent danger to the Omnicore acquisition. She finished by sliding a copy of the now activated prenuptial agreement across the desk. "He has become a liability to the family and to the company," she stated simply. "His judgment is compromised, Action must be taken. Charles was silent for a long time, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. He was a man who valued two things above all else: legacy and control. His son had threatened both. The affair was a private disgrace, but the corporate espionage was a cardinal sin. "The gala is in 2 weeks," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "It is our most important public event of the year." "I am aware," Isabella replied, "which is why Alexander's leave of absence must begin immediately. The story will be one of exhaustion of a dedicated CEO taking a much-needed rest on his doctor's advice before the birth of his firstborn. It's clean. It's believable. I will preside over the gala in his stead alongside you. We will present a united front for the family." Charles looked at his daughter-in-law, truly seeing her for the first time. He had always approved of her. She was poised, intelligent, from a good family. But he, like his son, had mistaken her quiet nature for passivity. He now saw the mind of a strategist and the will of a monarch. She wasn't just trying to punish his son. She was actively preserving the empire. In a twisted way, he was enforced. She was more of a sterling than his own son had been. "And what of Seraphina Dubois and Marcus Thorne?" he asked. "Leave them to me," Isabella said, a glint in her eye. "I believe they are about to have a very bad day." While Isabella met with Charles, Alexander's world was collapsing. His frantic calls to Seraphina went to voicemail. Finally, a single text message came through. "Don't contact me again. My arrangement with Thorne is terminated. Your poison." She was cutting her losses, a rat deserting a sinking ship. Then the call came from his father's office. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. The confrontation between father and son was brutal. Charles did not yell. He expressed his disappointment with a quiet, lethal contempt that was far worse than any tirade. He laid out Isabella's terms not as a proposal, but as a foregone conclusion. Alexander tried to argue to defend himself, but his words were empty. He had no leverage. He had been outmaneuvered by his wife and condemned by his father. By noon, his exile was official. The board was informed, the press release drafted. Alexander Sterling, the king of New York real estate, was gone. Isabella's next move was surgical. Using the information from the PI, she sent an anonymous, encrypted package to the board of directors of Thorne Industries. It contained proof of the corporate espionage scheme, detailing Seraphina's role as an industrial mole and evidence that Marcus Thorne had sanctioned it. She included a subtle hint that this information could easily find its way to the SEC. Thorne, a ruthless but not stupid man, would be forced to clean house to avoid a federal investigation. Seraphina's career as a corporate weapon was over. Her gallery, funded by powerful men she had now alienated, would likely wither and die within a year. Isabella had dismantled her rival without ever speaking her name again. 2 weeks later, the Sterling Foundation Gala took place. It was the social event of the season, and the gossip about Alexander's sudden sabbatical was the main topic of conversation. Isabella arrived on the arm of her father-in-law Charles. She was a vision of radiant power. She wore a gown of shimmering silver custom-made to accentuate her pregnancy. She dripped with the real Sterling family jewels, including the genuine Nightfall ruby necklace. She moved through the room with an unassailable confidence, greeting senators, billionaires, and cultural icons. She gave a speech that was both heartfelt and powerful, speaking of legacy family and the future, her son's future. She never mentioned Alexander's name once. It was a masterful performance. She wasn't just the CEO's wife anymore. She was the regent, the keeper of the throne. She had won. It wasn't a victory that brought her joy, but one that brought security. She had protected her child's future and her family's legacy from the recklessness of the man she had once loved. Her marriage was in ruins, but her life was her own. She held all the cards. Alexander was in a luxury clinic in the Swiss Alps, cut off and powerless, forced to confront the wreckage he had made of his life. Whether he could ever earn his way back, not to the head of the company, but to a place in his family, was a question only Isabella could answer. As she stood on the stage, looking out at the powerful faces watching her, one hand resting on her swollen belly, she felt a profound sense of peace. The gilded cage had been broken, not by escaping it, but by seizing control of it. The quiet wife had become a queen, and her reign was just beginning. In the world of the powerful, betrayal is often just another move on the chessboard. But what we've just witnessed is the story of a queen who refused to be a pawn. Isabella Sterling's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her power, her dignity, and the future of her family, not with screams and threats, but with intelligence, strategy, and an unbreakable will. She reminds us that true strength isn't always the loudest voice in the room, but often the quietest mind, the one that sees the entire board while others only see their next move. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Was she justified, or was her takedown too brutal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What happens when the perfect life is built on a perfect lie? For 7 months, Catherine Vance Thorne believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-million-dollar empire at their fingertips, and their first child on the way. She pictured a future filled with laughter in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But her husband, the charismatic Marcus Thorne, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Catherine on a desperate drive to a secluded Hamptons resort, the masterpiece of deceit Marcus has been crafting is about to be slashed to ribbons. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power isn't in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above Central Park, New York City, looked like a schematic, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Catherine Vance Thorne rested a hand on the gentle, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the life within her. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both profoundly powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The nursery was complete, a serene masterpiece of cream and gentle grey, with a handcrafted mobile of celestial bodies waiting to spin above a crib that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was curated for perfection, a testament to the combined might of the Vance and Thorne dynasties. Her family, the Vances, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unshakable force in the city's financial landscape. Marcus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, daring wunderkind, the man who could scent a market shift like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the society event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Catherine traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She looked at her husband, who stood with his back to her phone pressed to his ear. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted by success. His Savile Row suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame, and his voice, even muffled, was a low, confident baritone that could soothe panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future. Or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone sharp. "The timeline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned a practiced smile, instantly softening the hard lines of his face. "Sorry about that, my love. Incompetence is the one market I can't seem to short." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world doing?" "We're good." Catherine smiled the familiar warmth of his touch, chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been active today. I think he's going to be a soccer player. Or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey and something else she couldn't quite name. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne Creed Aventus, nor was it her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy, a woman's scent. She dismissed it. He'd been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen." He began settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something's come up. A big something. You know the tech merger I've been working on? The one in San Francisco?" Catherine nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, the key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it, but I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days. 3 at the most. It's the final push, Kat. This deal will secure our child's future 10 times over." A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. "Tonight? But Marcus, my checkup is tomorrow. The big one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again." His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. "I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I would rather be here holding your hand than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical. The timing is everything." He stroked her cheek. "I'll be back before you know it, and I promise I will not miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Moustique after the baby comes. Just the 3 of us." The promise of a future luxury was a common balm he applied to present disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Marcus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I understand. It's for us." "Exactly," he said, relief washing over his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. "I'll go pack. My flight is in 3 hours." As he walked towards their master suite, Catherine's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt was peeking out from the side pocket. Normally, she would never have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint alien scent of perfume, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of curiosity. Her heart thumping with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled the receipt free. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perle, the lingerie boutique. The date was from that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, an eyelash lace bra, a matching thong. Size small. Catherine was a medium, and with her pregnancy she had been living in comfortable, soft cotton. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones. There could be an explanation. A gift for a friend's wife. A present for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have given it to her with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands trembling. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She was being paranoid. The stress of the pregnancy was making her imagine things. Marcus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling a sleek Rimowa carry-on. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable but stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked every bit the global executive on the move. All set, he announced, his voice breezy. "The car is waiting downstairs. Now I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go with you to the doctor, right?" Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Marcus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Catherine had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotection. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. "Good," Marcus said. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. "I'll call you the moment I land. I love you more than anything." "I love you too," she managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black town car, a tiny, insignificant figure 60 floors below. The car didn't turn east towards JFK or LaGuardia. It headed west towards the West Side Highway, towards the Hamptons. The cold dread solidified into a terrifying certainty. The San Francisco Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her. And her husband was not on a business trip. He was on his way to a rendezvous. Alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the Hewland trapping of their perfect life, Catherine Vance Thorne finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break. She was not just a wife. She was a Vance. And the Vances did not crumble. They fought back. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her from her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The silence in the penthouse after Marcus left was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum from the climate control system seemed to mock Catherine's newfound solitude. She walked through the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life, the polished mahogany of the dining table where they'd hosted glittering dinner parties, the soft leather of the armchair where he read the Wall Street Journal every morning. It all felt like a movie set the backdrop for a story she had mistakenly believed was her own. She sank onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perle receipt burning a hole in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced, sifting through the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had glossed over. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed the weekends he'd spent at the office, but came home looking relaxed, not tired. The password on his personal laptop, which had always been her birthday, was suddenly changed. At the time, she had chalked it up to his company's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it seemed like a locked door she had never thought to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Catherine's posture. Beatrice Vance was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Catherine was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was blunt and fiery, her loyalty fierce and her bullshit detector flawless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, foregoing a hello as she dropped her purse onto a chair. Did the Prince of Wall Street forget to kiss his pregnant princess goodbye? Catherine's composure, so carefully maintained, overnight crumbled. She handed her sister the receipt. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. Size small. Beatrice said flatly, "Well, that's not for you, is it? Not unless he's planning for 2 years from now. The man is many things, but a forward planner in lingerie is not one of them." She looked up at Catherine, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Kath." What did he say? Through tears she could no longer suppress. Catherine recounted the story, the sudden trip, the San Francisco excuse, the car heading west. The Hamptons, Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course, it's off-season, quiet, exclusive, the perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Marcus has a corporate account at the Seagate. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff is trained to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Catherine's blood ran cold. The Seagate. Marcus had taken her there for their first anniversary. It was secluded, nestled in a private cove, a haven of understated luxury. The memory was now tainted, corrupted. "I have to know, Bea." Catherine said, her voice gaining a steely edge that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but beneath it, a new resolve was hardening. This was the Vance bloodline, kicking in the same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure?" Beatrice asked gently. "You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock." "What's more stressful?" Catherine countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "The agonizing uncertainty, or the cold, hard truth? This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deceit. I need to know what I'm fighting." Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "All right, then let's go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysterics. We gather irrefutable proof. We need more than a receipt for some slutty underwear." The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Catherine had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a reassurance, a tiny drumbeat of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, if light travel was permissible. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Miller said warmly. "A short car ride, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't overexert yourself." It was the clearance she needed. The next step was intel. While Catherine was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Catherine returned to the car, Beatrice was tapping furiously on her phone. "Okay. I think I have something," she said, her voice low and excited. "My friend Jessica owes me one." She pulled some strings. "She can't access the Seagate's official guest list, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a booking was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couple's deep tissue massage, booked under the name Mr. Thorne. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." The words Mrs. Thorne felt like a physical blow. He was not just with another woman. He was giving her Catherine's title, her identity, in this secret, sordid world he had created. "The appointment is at 4 p.m. Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. "That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path forward that felt real. Catherine called the family's trusted driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with the Vances for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to the Hamptons. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by the manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the Long Island Expressway. Catherine sat in the plush leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of past memories and future fears. She remembered Marcus proposing to her on a wind-swept cliff in Big Sur, telling her that his life had been black and white until she brought the color. Had that been a lie, too? Was he a sociopath, a brilliant actor playing the part of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. "Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We need to be smart. You are Catherine Vance Thorne. You have every right to be there. We'll go to the front desk. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You'll be charming, poised. They know the Vance name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. The Oceanfront Villa 7. That's where he is." Beatrice had managed to get the villa number from her source. Villa 7, the most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace that overlooked the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then we wait," Beatrice said firmly. "We sit in the lobby, we order tea, and we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut says they'll be back in the room. People like that, they want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for." As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to the Hamptons, Catherine felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own fate. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The unraveling thread had led her here to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull it until the entire tapestry of lies came undone. The Seagate Resort and Spa was designed to look like it had been carved from the very dunes it occupied. Weathered grey cedar, vast expanses of glass and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic, wildly expensive tranquility. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult. Frank pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the portico. A valet, young and crisp in his uniform, rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Catherine's hand a final firm squeeze. "Showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it." Catherine stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She was the very picture of refined elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest raging within her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic desk of reclaimed wood. Catherine glided towards the desk, Beatrice, a half step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Marcus Thorne. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Anja, offered a polite professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. It's a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Catherine produced her driver's license. Anja's eyes flickered from the ID to Catherine's face, then to the name Thorne. The recognition was instant. Marcus Thorne was a name that commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Anya said, her smile warming slightly. "Mr. Thorne is checked into Villa 7. I must say it's a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for some intense solitary work. The lie repeated by a stranger was like a fresh stab wound." Solitary work. Catherine's smile didn't waver. "He works far too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I'd like to be waiting for him when he returns." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the primary guest present was a breach of protocol even for a spouse. Anya hesitated, her professional training warring with the desire to please a guest of Catherine's stature. Normally we would need to call the room to get Mr. Thorne's verbal confirmation. She began, her tone apologetic. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Anya, I've just driven 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil the entire thing. Surely we can keep this our little secret?" She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both authentic and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Anja's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program a key for you." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Catherine was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. Keycard in hand, they walked away from the desk. "Villa 7 is at the far end of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy. The most privacy to do what Catherine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum." The walk to the villa was the longest of Catherine's life. They followed a winding stone path that meandered through wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of the crashing waves became a relentless roar. Each step was a drumbeat towards a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they were there. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque next to a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. Kath. Are you ready? Beatrice asked, her voice soft. Catherine looked at the door, then out at the grey, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in its own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit theirs. That image gave her the final surge of strength she needed. I am, she said. She turned to her sister. Wait here. I have to do this alone. Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Catherine's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Catherine took a deep breath, held the keycard to the electronic lock, and waited for the small green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa's entryway led into a spacious living area, impeccably decorated in shades of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne sat in a silver bucket on a low table, 2 flutes next to it. One was empty, the other half full, a faint lipstick smear on its rim. A man's jacket, Marcus's, was thrown carelessly over a chair, and from the bedroom just beyond, a partially open door, she could hear voices. A man's low laugh, Marcus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laugh in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she crept across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy post-coital intimacy. The king-sized bed was a tangle of white sheets. Marcus was propped up against the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting next to him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short, black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag, Catherine realized with a sickening lurch. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Marcus's chest with her finger. You're sure no one will find out, the woman's voice said. It was a voice Catherine vaguely recognized. Your wife, she's not the suspicious type. Catherine Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Catherine's heart into 1,000,000 pieces. She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in San Francisco saving the world. She's a good woman, but a little naive. It's one of her charms. He was about to say more, but he glanced up, perhaps sensing a change in the light or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Catherine's. Time seemed to stop. The color drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then morphed into shocked recognition. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She knew this woman. It was Sloane Davenport, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This wasn't some random, meaningless affair. This was a liaison with a direct professional competitor. Sloane Davenport stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Catherine who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, calm, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It seems you're in the middle of some very intense solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Marcus flinched, as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a ruin. And Catherine was standing in the rubble, the undisputed, terrifying victor of this first brutal battle. The silence that followed Catherine's words was thick and suffocating. Sloane Davenport, recovering her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter around herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Marcus remained frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The cocksure master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Catherine," he finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? You should be in New York. The baby is fine." Catherine cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze drift disdainfully over Sloane, then back to Marcus. "I see the San Francisco Tech Summit was relocated, and that the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Marcus, or just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Sloane's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Sloane to the spot. "You stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it through to its conclusion." Catherine took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She looked around the suite at the champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that, or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Marcus finally found his legs, scrambling out of the bed and grabbing for his trousers. "Cat, please. Let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk." "This isn't what it looks like." Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It isn't what it looks like, Marcus. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that sentence is? I am standing in a hotel room that you booked under your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm, half naked in a bed that you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is for how long." Sloane, seeing an opportunity to sow chaos, spoke up. "For about 6 months," she said coolly, looking directly at Catherine. "If you're going to have the details, you might as well have them all." It was a cruel, calculated blow, designed to shatter Catherine's composure. But Catherine didn't even flinch. She didn't grant Sloane a single glance. Her focus remained entirely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Catherine repeated softly, nodding to herself. "So this started just after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Marcus. You deserve an award for it." She turned, her movement fluid and graceful, and walked back towards the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a vacuum of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. Beatrice was waiting by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Catherine's expression, a mask of cold, terrifying calm, she knew. "Let's go," Catherine said, her voice flat. They walked back down the winding path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes pulling away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The adrenaline wore off, and the crushing weight of the betrayal slammed into her. She didn't cry out. The sob was a silent, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice wrapped her arms around her, offering what little comfort she could. "He's dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He's nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We will burn him to the ground." Catherine's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet," she said, her voice raspy. "First, I need to understand everything. This wasn't just a cheap affair, Bea. The woman was Sloane Davenport." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Marcus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What the hell is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Catherine said. "But I'm going to find out." They drove back to the city in near silence. When she arrived at the empty penthouse, it felt alien, contaminated. She instructed Frank to take her to her father's residence on the Upper East Side. She couldn't bear to be in the home she had shared with Marcus. Just as she was walking into the grand old-world lobby of her father's building, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Kat, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It is not what you think. Sloane is not my mistress. It's business. I am using her. Call me. It's vital." Catherine stared at the message, her heart pounding. I am using her. It was a desperate, self-serving excuse, a classic narcissist's gambit, reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, albeit ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, to the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Sloane's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. What if in some twisted way he was telling a sliver of the truth? The affair being with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "She's been feeding me inside information on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap, but I was the one setting it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Kat. I can explain." This was the twist. The sudden, nauseating turn. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but a deeply unethical, potentially illegal act of corporate espionage. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for the affair. He was trying to rebrand it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband was not just a cheat. He was a fool, playing a dangerous game, or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just been irrevocably blurred. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts. And Marcus, in his desperation, had just handed her a new and powerful weapon, the knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to ensure his complete and utter destruction. Alistair Vance's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Catherine shared with Marcus. It was a fortress of old money, filled with dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of leather and aged paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Catherine, flanked by a grim-faced Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it, like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him the text messages from Marcus, he was silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But a dangerous one. To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy. It's a level of moral bankruptcy that is frankly impressive." "He thinks it will work," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method. He's appealing to my avarice." "He is appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected gently. "He judges you by his own debased standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce attorney, Catherine. He has confessed in writing to corporate espionage. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, should it be handled incorrectly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Let's just release this to the board of his company." "Let's expose him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We do not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate on the assumption that Marcus is lying, that this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his skin. But we also operate on the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, the Vance residence became a war room. Alistair pulled in his top legal counsel and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kobe, who specialized in discreet, high-stakes corporate intelligence. Catherine was not a passive participant. The shock had transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist, her mind honed by a lifetime of observing her father proving to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Kobe with every detail she could remember about Marcus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the new secretive patterns of his work. She gave him the login details to their shared cloud storage family accounts, anything that might hold a clue. "Marcus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence," Catherine told the team, her voice steady. "His real weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That's the vulnerability we will exploit." While Kobe began his digital deep dive, Catherine made a call. She dialed Gregory Shaw, Marcus's partner, and the COO of Thorn Capital. Gregory was the cautious, steady hand to Marcus's daring, often reckless genius. He was a numbers man, a risk analyst who had on more than one occasion privately expressed his concerns to Catherine about Marcus's aggressive strategies. "Gregory." "It's Catherine Thorn," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a significant undisclosed liability to the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Meanwhile, Kobe hit pay dirt. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Catherine had forgotten existed, he found Marcus's digital treasure trove. It was a series of encrypted files. But Marcus, in his arrogance, had used a password related to a personal milestone. Kobe's team easily cross-referenced the stock ticker of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Marcus's notes on the Sterling Nash takeover, and it confirmed his text messages. He was using Sloan. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had supposedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board's divisions, their largest institutional shareholders' pressure points. Marcus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Catherine saw it as a signed confession. But as Kobe dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the intel Sloan had supposedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings, and he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Catherine into the study. "There is a problem," he said, his Israeli accent precise. "The information from the woman Sloan is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, just enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, the ones about shareholder positions and their debt covenants, they are subtly wrong. They are not mistakes. They are traps." A hush fell over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Sloan has given him," Kobe continued, pointing to his screen, "is designed to encourage Thorn Capital to launch its takeover bid at a specific price point, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our real analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws that is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the takeover. The blowback would leave Thorn Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. The second twist. The real twist. So she wasn't the honey trap, Catherine breathed. He was. She was playing him from the very beginning. Sloan Davenport wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Marcus carefully crafted misinformation, leading him and his company towards a cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. She wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. She was gutting him from the inside out, using his own arrogance as her weapon. Alistair Vance allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant. Utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He handed you the gun to shoot him, and you've just discovered it's a cannon." Catherine now held all the cards. She had proof of Marcus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making a trap set by the very woman he thought he was controlling. She could not only destroy her husband personally, but could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet Gregory Shaw, she was no longer just Catherine Thorne, the wronged wife. She was Catherine Vance, the inheritor of her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Marcus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous place in Tribeca, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. Gregory Shaw was already there, nursing an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Catherine's call had clearly unsettled him. "Catherine," he said, rising as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, Gregory," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down immediately. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Marcus." Gregory's expression tightened. "I don't follow. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal?" "I'll admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections," Catherine said, "finally taking a seat, are based on a fantasy. A fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Sloane Davenport." The name landed on the table between them with the force of a physical object. Gregory visibly paled. Sloane Davenport. From Sterling Nash. That's impossible. It's professional suicide. For Marcus, yes." Catherine agreed. For her, it's the coup of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. She didn't speak with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single damning piece of evidence on her phone, a time-stamped photo she had instructed Kobe to retrieve from the Seagate security footage, showing Marcus and Sloane entering the elevator together. Then she moved to the business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Sloane was leading Marcus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She didn't show him Marcus's confessional notes. That was her trump card to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data. Kobe had compiled the analysis that proved Sloane's information was a lie. Gregory listened, his initial shock turning to dawning horror, and then to cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Thorn Capital alongside Marcus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn that Marcus had exposed them all, not just through recklessness, but through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control fire, Gregory said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip. Yes, Catherine said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the takeover is on Friday. We have 2 days. What do you want? Gregory asked, his eyes locking on hers. He was seeing her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player. A formidable one. I want what you want, Gregory. To protect the firm. To excise the cancer. I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Marcus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be met with applause. He will be met with a unified front. And you? Gregory asked. What is your price? My price, Catherine said. Her voice dropping is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be quiet, swift, and uncontested. He will walk away with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on Wall Street. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. Friday. We'll be ready. The next 2 days were a blur of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvers. Alistair Vance worked his magic behind the scenes, his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. Gregory Shaw, armed with Catherine's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water, Marcus's blood. On Friday morning, Marcus Thorne walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Thorne Capitol building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest victory of his career. He had tried calling Catherine dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was angry, hysterical, but would eventually come around once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox, methods had secured for their family. He smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. Good morning, everyone. A historic day. No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. Before we begin, Marcus Gregory said, his voice dangerously calm, we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies. Marcus's smile faltered. What are you talking about? My source is ironclad. Is your source Sloane Davenport? Gregory asked flatly. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the boardroom doors opened. Catherine walked in. She was flanked by her father and 2 lawyers. She was composed, powerful, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future, a future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. Catherine, he choked out. What is this? This, Marcus, she said. Her voice, ringing with clarity in the silent room, is called due diligence. Something you abandoned 6 months ago. One of her lawyers slid a folder down the table to him. It contained the photo from the hotel, the analysis of Sloane's flawed data, and on top printouts of his own text messages to Catherine. His own words condemning him. I am using her. He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, out-thought, and utterly destroyed. The board has held an emergency session, Gregory announced into the void. We have voted unanimously. We are tabling the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman. Marcus looked from the board members to Alistair Vance, whose expression was one of cool satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on his wife. Her face held no pity, no lingering affection. It held only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Sloane Davenport's scheme had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been uncovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything, all because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who carried his child. Catherine stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She didn't need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she didn't look back. She was walking towards her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She had become the embodiment of its power. Her child would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged the queen of the board. In the end, it wasn't the affair that brought down Marcus Thorne's empire. It was his hubris. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed. They infect everything they touch. Catherine's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She didn't just survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own story and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Catherine's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.